Homeowners were paying monthly fees for a road the HOA didn't own. The first police cruiser hadn't even stopped rolling before the HOA president pointed straight at me and demanded I be arrested. Behind her, 86 homeowners sat trapped behind the gate I had closed across my own $9.6 million estate road. They all believed I was blocking their only entrance. The strange part? I wasn't worried at all. Because inside one old folder was a piece of paper that was about to change everything they thought they knew. Stay with me, because what happened after that 911 call turned into something none of us expected. And before we get into it, if you enjoy true-to-life HOA, ranch, and property rights stories where patience, good records, and common sense matter more than shouting, take a second to subscribe. We'd love to have you here for the next story. The first SUV reached the gate at exactly 7:02 that morning. 30 seconds later, another one rolled in behind it. Then came a landscaping truck pulling a trailer, a school bus that stopped so suddenly the driver threw both hands into the air, and a delivery van whose driver leaned out the window, trying to understand why the line had stopped. Within 10 minutes, Holloway Trace looked less like a quiet ranch road and more like a parking lot stretching toward Silver Pine Reserve. I stood on the opposite side of the closed steel gate, with my hands resting on a thick manila folder. The barricades hadn't appeared overnight. I'd positioned them before sunrise exactly where Rachel Whitmore instructed me to place them. Bright orange barriers blocked the pavement. Fresh county survey stakes stood along both shoulders. A laminated legal notice hung from the center of the gate where nobody could claim they hadn't seen it. Private estate road. Access suspended. Authorized entry by written permission only. Every word had been reviewed by my attorney before it went up. Nobody bothered reading it. They only stared at the growing traffic jam. The first horn sounded, then another. People climbed out of luxury SUVs carrying coffee mugs instead of briefcases. Contractors shut off diesel engines and gathered near the front of the line. Parents stepped out of vehicles to see why their children would be late for school. Conversations spread faster than the morning light. What happened? Is there an accident? Who closed the road? One man finally pointed toward me. That's him. Their eyes followed his finger. I didn't wave. I didn't speak. I simply waited. 5 minutes later, a white Range Rover swept around the bend and stopped sideways across the gravel shoulder. The driver's door flew open. Marissa Langford stepped out without bothering to close it. She wore a tailored cream blazer over dark slacks, looking more prepared for a television interview than a confrontation at a ranch gate. Even from 50 feet away, I recognized the expression she'd worn the last time we spoke. Calm confidence wrapped around absolute certainty. Only today, certainty had been replaced by anger. She marched directly toward me, phone already in one hand. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" she demanded. I looked at the gate, closing my road. She stopped only a few feet away. "This road serves 86 families. It serves my ranch. You can't simply block the only entrance to an entire community." I already did. Her jaw tightened. Behind her, more residents gathered near the barricade, listening. She lowered her voice, perhaps realizing an audience was forming. "Wade, let's not make this bigger than it has to be. It became bigger months ago. You'll create chaos." I didn't create it. For a second, neither of us spoke. She glanced toward the line of trapped vehicles, then back at me. "You'll remove these barriers." "No." One word. Nothing more. Her expression hardened. "You understand there are deliveries coming through here? Contractors, school transportation, emergency vehicles. I understand exactly what this road was built for." "And what is that?" "My family." She stared at me as if waiting for the rest of the explanation. None came. Silence has a way of frustrating people who expect arguments. Marissa had always preferred debates she could control. Instead, she got quiet. Then she lifted her phone. "Fine," she said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "We'll let the sheriff explain property law to you." She dialed 911 without taking her eyes off me. I listened while she described an irresponsible landowner blocking what she repeatedly called the community's only entrance. Interesting choice of words. Not once did she call it my road. Not once did she mention ownership. Only inconvenience. Only urgency. Only the neighborhood. When she ended the call, she folded her arms with the confidence of someone expecting immediate victory. "They'll be here any minute. I know. You don't seem worried. I've had several weeks to prepare." That answer seemed to bother her more than the barricades. The first patrol vehicle arrived 18 minutes later. A second deputy followed close behind. Blue lights reflected off pickup trucks, polished SUVs, and the steel gate stretching across Holloway Trace. Conversations stopped almost instantly. Sheriff Daniel Reeves climbed out of the lead vehicle with the slow, deliberate movements of someone who had learned long ago that rushing rarely improved difficult situations. He recognized me immediately. "Morning, Wade." "Morning, Sheriff." Before Marissa could reach him, she was already talking. "Thank goodness you're here. This man has illegally blocked the only access road serving our entire neighborhood. Residents can't leave. Contractors can't enter. This has become a public safety issue." Sheriff Reeves listened without interrupting. Then he looked at me. "Wade?" I didn't argue. I didn't point. I didn't accuse anyone of trespassing. I simply held out the manila folder. Inside were certified deeds, county surveys, maintenance invoices, recorded plats, legal notices. Everything Rachel Whitmore had spent weeks organizing. The sheriff accepted it and flipped open the cover. Marissa frowned. She'd expected shouting. She'd expected emotion. Instead, she got paperwork. Sheriff Reeves read the first page, then the second. His expression didn't change. Behind him, the second deputy quietly radioed dispatch. Nobody spoke. Even the residents waiting beside their vehicles seemed to understand something important had just shifted. The sheriff looked up from the documents. His eyes moved from me to the gate, then toward Marissa Langford. Before anyone touched those barricades, only one question mattered. Who actually owned Holloway Trace? Sheriff Daniel Reeves didn't answer immediately. Instead, he continued turning pages inside the folder while dispatch searched county records. Marissa Langford shifted her weight impatiently beside him. Behind the barricade, 86 homeowners waited for someone in uniform to force the gate open. They assumed the answer would take seconds. It had taken my family nearly 60 years to create. That road wasn't something I bought from a developer or inherited from a distant relative I barely remembered. My father built Holloway Trace one section at a time after buying this Wyoming ranch, long before luxury subdivisions reached our valley. Every drainage ditch, every culvert, every retaining wall existed because he refused to leave work unfinished. When I eventually became a county road engineer, I spent 4 decades designing roads for other people. The one I understood best had always been the one leading home. After I retired, Clara and I walked Holloway Trace almost every morning. She never cared about engineering. She cared about what surrounded it. Every spring, she planted cottonwoods along the shoulders. Every fall, she tied small orange ribbons around the mailbox near the entrance. She always said a road should welcome people before they ever reached the house. 4 years after losing her to heart disease, those trees became the closest thing I had to hearing her voice again. That was why I still maintained the road myself. Not because anyone required it, because memories deserve maintenance too. For years, the only vehicles passing my gate belonged here. Neighbors, feed deliveries, friends. Then Silver Pine Reserve appeared beyond the western ridge. Construction crews cleared pasture land that had once bordered my ranch. Within 2 years, expensive homes stood where cattle had grazed. I never objected. Growth wasn't my enemy. I even welcomed several new families when they stopped by to introduce themselves. The trouble began so quietly, most people would have missed it. One contractor asked if Holloway Trace was the neighborhood entrance. A week later, a furniture truck asked the same question, then an appliance delivery, then a propane company. Each driver sounded sincere. Each believed someone had already confirmed they were supposed to be there. The first time I corrected them, they apologized and turned around. By the 10th time, I stopped wondering whether it was coincidence. Somebody was teaching people the wrong story. Months later, I learned exactly how confidently that story was being told. I was repairing a fence near the entrance when a white Range Rover rolled onto the shoulder. Marissa Langford stepped out carrying a leather portfolio and the polished smile of someone accustomed to hearing yes before she finished asking the question. "Mr. Holloway? That's me. I've heard wonderful things about you. I'm Marissa Langford, president of Silver Pine Reserve." We shook hands. She looked past me toward the road before speaking again. "Our residents absolutely love driving through your property." Interesting choice of words. Not thank you. Not we appreciate it. Love, as though enjoyment had become permission. She opened her portfolio and unfolded a color map across the hood of my pickup. "This route is becoming very important to the community." I studied the paper. Holloway Trace had been highlighted in blue. "My road looks different on your map. It functions as the most practical access corridor. It functions as my private estate road." Her smile tightened almost invisibly. "We'd like to discuss a permanent shared access agreement." "No." She blinked. "You haven't heard the proposal." "I don't need to. We're prepared to contribute toward maintenance. I've maintained it for decades. This benefits everyone. It doesn't benefit the owner." That landed harder than I expected. For the first time, the practiced smile slipped. She folded the map slowly. "You may see this differently after you've had time to think." "I won't." She looked once more down Holloway Trace before climbing back into her SUV. As she drove away, something told me that conversation hadn't been the beginning of a negotiation. It had been the beginning of a campaign. I didn't know how far that campaign would reach. I also didn't know that buried inside county planning files was a document proving Silver Pine Reserve had never intended to rely on my road in the first place. Someone had erased their original entrance long before they ever came knocking on my gate, and I intended to find out why. At first, I assumed Marissa Langford would return with a better offer. Instead, she returned with something far more effective. She returned with repetition. Within 2 weeks, new signs appeared near the subdivision entrance. Silver Pine Reserve resident access, no company logo, no county seal, nothing that actually claimed ownership, just enough carefully chosen words to make people stop asking questions. A month later, digital neighborhood maps began showing Holloway Trace as the preferred route to the community. Delivery companies updated their navigation systems. Landscapers started arriving before sunrise. Contractors hauled lumber through my ranch without slowing down. Furniture trucks rolled past my mailbox, as though they had every right to be there. The drivers weren't hostile. Most smiled and waved. That made the situation worse. They genuinely believed someone had already handled the legal details. One afternoon, I stopped a plumbing contractor before he reached the lower bridge. "Who told you to use this road?" I asked. "The HOA office," he answered without hesitation. "They said it's the neighborhood entrance." "No, they said it's the neighborhood access." He frowned. "Isn't that the same thing?" "No." He looked back toward the subdivision. "I honestly thought this belonged to them." I know. He apologized, turned his truck around, and left. He wasn't the problem. The story he'd been given was. The traffic kept growing. Some mornings I counted more than 40 vehicles crossing Holloway Trace before breakfast. Tire ruts deepened along the shoulders. One delivery van clipped a drainage marker. A roofing trailer crushed fresh gravel I'd spread only days earlier. Every repair or fare came out of my pocket. Every driver assumed someone else would pay. Then came the newsletters. A neighbor dropped one into my mailbox with a handwritten note. Thought you should see this. Buried halfway down the second page sat a short paragraph. Residents are reminded that Holloway Trace remains the community's primary transportation corridor. Please drive carefully while future access improvements are evaluated. Transportation corridor. Interesting phrase. Not private road, not a state road, not someone else's property. Transportation corridor. Legal enough to sound official. Vague enough to avoid saying anything that could easily be challenged. Marissa understood language. She knew people rarely questioned words that appeared in print. The following Saturday, curiosity got the better of me. Silver Pine Reserve held an open community coffee gathering every month near its clubhouse. I parked outside the entrance and walked over without announcing myself. Nobody recognized me at first. Small groups of residents stood around folding tables discussing landscaping projects, fishing, grandchildren, and property values. Then I heard it. I'm glad we have 2 entrances, one homeowner said, while stirring cream into his coffee. His wife nodded. If the highway ever closes, at least we've got Holloway Trace. Another man joined the conversation. The HOA made a smart decision securing that road. Securing, not using, not requesting, securing. I realized something in that moment. Marissa wasn't trying to convince me anymore. She was convincing 86 homeowners. If enough people believed the same story, they would eventually stop asking whether it had ever been true. As I turned to leave, Harold Briggs caught up with me in the parking lot. He introduced himself quietly. You're Wade Holloway. I am. I've seen you working along the road. He hesitated before speaking again. I don't think everyone understands what's happening. What do you mean? My wife and I moved here last year. We were told Holloway Trace belonged to the community. Honestly, I never questioned it. He looked embarrassed. I probably should have. It isn't your fault. He glanced back toward the clubhouse. Marissa speaks with a lot of confidence. Confidence doesn't transfer ownership. He managed a small smile. No. Then his expression changed. But if she's wrong about the road. He never finished the sentence. He didn't have to. Because we both understood the real question. If Marissa had convinced an entire neighborhood that my private road belonged to them, what else had she convinced them to believe? That question stayed with me all weekend. On Monday morning, I drove straight to the Carbon County Records Office instead of confronting anyone at the HOA. Arguments disappear. Recorded documents don't. Denise Harper looked up from the public records counter the moment I walked in. Back in my office already? She asked with a smile. I need everything ever filed on Holloway Trace. She raised an eyebrow. Everything? Original plats? Road classifications, subdivision filings, easements, planning revisions. If it mentions my road, I want to read it. For the next 4 hours, we opened archive boxes that hadn't been touched in years. Original ranch deeds, county survey books, engineering drawings, drainage permits, road maintenance records. The paper trail stretched back more than half a century. Every document told exactly the same story. Holloway Trace had never been dedicated to public use. The county had never accepted maintenance responsibility. No recorded easement existed. No transfer of ownership had ever been filed. Legally, Nothing had changed since my father built the road, which meant someone had changed only the story. Then Denise stopped turning pages. Hold on. She disappeared into the archive room and returned carrying a larger tube labeled with the original Silver Pine Reserve subdivision number. I don't think anyone's requested this file in years. She carefully unrolled the oversized engineering plans across the table. I immediately noticed something missing. Or rather, something that used to be there. A broad paved entrance extended from the eastern side of the proposed subdivision directly to State Highway 287. The drawing identified it as Future Primary Access Road. I looked at Denise. Where is this road today? She compared it with the final recorded subdivision plat. It isn't. Someone had literally removed an entire entrance from the final design. No explanation. No replacement. Just gone. Do we have later revisions? I asked. Denise nodded. 30 minutes later, she placed 3 amended planning submissions beside the original plans. Each revision shortened the eastern road, then eliminated it completely. The final filing quietly redirected all traffic toward the western property line, toward Holloway Trace, toward my ranch. I leaned back in my chair. So they always knew they needed another entrance. They certainly planned one, but they never built it. Denise folded her hands. I can't tell you why. I know someone who can. 2 days later, I met Rachel Whitmore in her office. She spent nearly an hour reviewing every document without saying a word. When she reached the original subdivision plans, she finally looked up. Well? She tapped the drawing. This changes everything. How? Because this wasn't an accident. She laid the original and final plats side by side. Developers don't erase roads for fun, so why remove it? They usually remove infrastructure for one reason. Money. She nodded. Building another access road through this terrain would have cost a fortune. She reached for a calculator. Grading, drainage, culverts, environmental mitigation, utility relocation. She looked at me again. They probably saved several $1 million and replaced it with mine. They replaced construction costs with your property. Neither of us spoke for a moment. The room suddenly felt much quieter. Rachel closed the file. Don't celebrate. I'm not. Good. She slid every document neatly back into the folder. Because proving ownership is only half the case. The other half? Showing they knew exactly what they were doing. I frowned. You think we can prove that? Rachel smiled for the first time that afternoon. I don't think. She rested her hand on the subdivision plans. I know. Then she handed me a checklist. Maintenance invoices, tax records, historic photographs, survey certifications, every repair I'd ever paid for, every document connected to Holloway Trace. We're not building an argument, she said. We're building a timeline. As I gathered the folder, Rachel gave me one final instruction. No more conversations with Marissa. What if she comes back? Let her. What do I say? Nothing. She stood and walked me to the door. People who don't have evidence usually get louder, and people who do, they organize it. Walking back to my truck, I realized something. For months, Marissa had been trying to convince people that repetition created ownership. Rachel intended to prove exactly the opposite. And somewhere inside those records was the document that would explain why the HOA refused to stop using my road, no matter how many times I told them it wasn't theirs. The answer arrived before we finished collecting evidence. It came without a return address. Rachel called me one Tuesday morning. You need to come to my office. What did you find? I didn't. She held up a large manila envelope after I walked in. Somebody found us. Inside were copies of Silver Pine Reserve financial reports, board meeting summaries, budget worksheets, and handwritten notes from committee meetings. No signature, no explanation, just paperwork. Rachel spread the documents across her conference table. Whoever mailed these wanted us to see them. I began reading. Most of it looked ordinary. Landscaping expenses, snow removal, clubhouse maintenance, insurance premiums. Then one line near the bottom of a quarterly budget stopped me cold. Road access improvement assessment, monthly, collected from every homeowner. I read it again, then a third time. They're charging residents for a road they don't own, Rachel finished. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. The amount wasn't enormous. It didn't have to be. 86 homes paying every month added up quickly. What exactly are they improving? I asked. Rachel slid another document toward me. Minutes from a planning committee meeting. One sentence had been highlighted by whoever mailed the packet. Long-term access improvements remain a priority for maintaining community value. Long-term access. No address, no legal description, no parcel number. Just enough vague language to avoid naming Holloway Trace directly. But everyone inside that room knew exactly which road they were discussing. Rachel leaned back. This changes the case. Because money is involved? Because representations are involved. She tapped the budget sheet. If homeowners are paying assessments connected to access, someone had an obligation to know whether they actually possessed those rights. That afternoon, my phone rang. Harold Briggs. Wade, do you have a minute? I do. His voice sounded different, less uncertain, more concerned. I've been asking questions. What kind? The budget kind. He explained that several homeowners had recently requested copies of HOA financial statements after rumors about the road began circulating. Most had expected simple answers. Instead, they received vague explanations. Marissa keeps saying everything is under control. Do people believe her? There was a long pause. Not like they used to. That caught my attention. Harold continued. My wife asked why we're paying an access assessment if the road belongs to someone else. What was the answer? They changed the subject. Another pause. Then they told everyone legal matters were confidential. I thanked him for calling. Before hanging up, he said something that stayed with me. I don't think most of us are angry with you anymore. What are you angry about? The possibility that nobody bothered checking the truth. By the end of that week, Rachel and I had organized every anonymous document into chronological order. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Each year, references to road access became more frequent. Each budget included larger assessment totals. Each planning meeting assumed Holloway Trace would remain available forever. Nobody discussed purchasing it. Nobody discussed negotiating an easement. Nobody discussed asking permission. The road simply existed inside their plans, as though believing something long enough made it real. Then another envelope arrived. Smaller this time. Inside was a single photograph. It showed Marissa standing beside the subdivision's original presentation board years earlier. Mounted on the display behind her was the first development map. The eastern entrance road, the one later erased from the official plans, was still clearly visible. Rachel stared at the picture. They knew, I know. No. She pointed toward the image. They knew before they sold the first house. That was different. Very different. Selling homes while displaying one access plan, then quietly building another. Raised questions no board meeting could easily answer. Rachel carefully placed the photograph into a protective sleeve. We're almost ready. For court? She shook her head. For notice. What kind of notice? The kind that gives them one last opportunity to stop pretending. She stood and closed the evidence box. If they ignore that. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Because for the first time since this began, the evidence wasn't merely proving ownership. It was beginning to prove knowledge. And once you prove someone knew the truth, every decision they make afterward becomes much harder to defend. Rachel didn't file a lawsuit. Not yet. Instead, she prepared something far more dangerous. A certified notice. Every sentence had been written with one purpose: to eliminate every future excuse. The packet contained copies of my recorded deed, certified surveys, historical plats, maintenance records, photographs of the road, and a formal legal opinion explaining exactly why Holloway Trace remained private property. Attached to the back was a simple deadline. Unauthorized access would end in 30 days. No surprises, no hidden agenda. Just notice. Rachel mailed identical copies to the Silver Pine Reserve HOA, Marissa Langford, the HOA's attorney, the county planning office, the sheriff's department, emergency management, and the local fire district. If anyone says they didn't know, she told me, they'll have to explain why they signed for the envelope. 3 days later, the green certified mail receipts began arriving. Every single one had been accepted. Marissa knew. The board knew. The county knew. Everyone now had exactly the same information. What happened next told us more than any document ever could. Nothing. Traffic continued every morning. Landscaping crews crossed my ranch before sunrise. Concrete trucks rattled over the culvert I'd repaired the previous year. Delivery vans ignored the legal notice posted near the entrance. It was as if the certified letters had never existed. Rachel wasn't surprised. They're betting against you. What does that mean? They believe you'll never actually close the road. A week later, Marissa proved Rachel right. She appeared on the neighborhood website in a video update recorded inside the clubhouse. I watched it twice. Residents should not be concerned by recent legal correspondence, she said confidently. Our board continues working to protect uninterrupted community access. She never mentioned ownership. She never mentioned my deed. She never mentioned the county records. Only reassurance, only confidence. Only promises. The comments below the video were different. Some residents thanked her. Others asked uncomfortable questions. One wanted to know why homeowners were paying access assessments if another entrance supposedly existed. The question disappeared by the next morning. Deleted. Harold Briggs called that afternoon. They're removing comments now. People noticed? They noticed because more questions keep appearing. He lowered his voice. I don't think the board expected residents to start reading budgets. Do they believe me now? I think they're starting to believe the paperwork. That evening, Rachel and I met again. She placed a checklist between us. One last step. What now? Cameras. Within 2 days, discrete cameras covered every approach to Holloway Trace. Not to catch criminals, to establish facts. Every vehicle entering, every commercial truck, every delivery, every date, every time. If this reaches court, Rachel said, we won't estimate traffic. We'll prove it. Meanwhile, she contacted county emergency management herself. If Marissa kept insisting the road couldn't legally close because of public safety, Rachel wanted official answers. The responses arrived surprisingly fast. The fire district confirmed its emergency response maps relied on the subdivision's recorded legal access route, not Holloway Trace. County emergency management reached the same conclusion. So did the sheriff's office. The road through my ranch had never been designated as required emergency access. Not once. Rachel smiled as she filed each response into another binder. One more assumption gone. A few days later, another certified envelope arrived. This one came from the HOA's attorney. 6 pages. Expensive letterhead. Confident language. I read every word. The letter spoke about neighborhood reliance, community expectations, property values, public inconvenience, safety concerns. It quoted no deed, no easement, no survey, no recorded agreement. After I finished reading, I handed it back to Rachel. "That's it?" She nodded. "They're arguing consequences, not ownership, because they can't argue ownership." She slid the letter into the evidence file. They've officially chosen feelings over records. The deadline came closer with every passing day. Nobody contacted me. Nobody asked to negotiate. Nobody requested temporary access. Nobody offered to purchase an easement. Every morning the traffic rolled across Holloway Trace exactly as before. Every afternoon, another camera memory card filled with evidence. The silence coming from the HOA wasn't confidence anymore. It was calculation. They had convinced themselves I wouldn't dare inconvenience 86 homeowners. They believed public pressure would force me to surrender. They believed no ranch owner would ever close the only road an entire neighborhood depended on. The evening before the deadline, I walked the full length of Holloway Trace alone. At the steel gate, I stopped beside the stack of barricades waiting in the bed of my pickup. Rachel's final text arrived just before sunset. "Everything has been documented. Everything has been noticed. Tomorrow, don't argue. Just follow the plan." For the first time in months, there was nothing left to investigate, nothing left to organize, nothing left to prove. Tomorrow morning, the paperwork would stop sitting inside binders. It would be standing across the road. I reached Holloway Trace before dawn. The barricades went exactly where Rachel's checklist said they should. The legal notice was bolted to the center of the steel gate. Fresh survey stakes marked both property lines. Every camera came online one by one. Nothing about the closure was emotional. Everything about it was documented. By 7 o'clock, the first pickup stopped. Then an SUV. Within minutes, the line stretched toward Silver Pine Reserve, exactly as Rachel predicted. Some drivers got out to read the notice. Others never bothered. They simply stared at the barricades as if they couldn't imagine anyone saying no. At 7:18, Marissa's black Range Rover came around the curve much faster than the rest. She stopped hard enough to throw dust across the shoulder. The driver's door flew open. "What is this?" she demanded. I nodded toward the notice. "It explains itself." She walked straight to the gate and read every line. When she finished, she turned back toward me. "You actually did it." I said I would. "This affects 86 families. I sent notice to every one of your board members. You can't close the only entrance. I didn't design your subdivision." That answer made her pause. Only for a second. Then the confidence returned. "This road has served our community for years. It has served my ranch for decades." She pointed toward the growing traffic. "Look at these people. I am. They depend on this road. They were told to." For the first time, she had no immediate reply. Instead, she reached into her purse, removed her phone, and held it up where everyone could see. "If you're forcing this," she tapped the screen, "I'll let law enforcement stop it." Several residents moved closer. Someone began recording with a cell phone. A contractor muttered that he would be late for another job. Parents looked at their watches. The pressure was building exactly where Marissa wanted it. She spoke loudly enough for the entire crowd. "Yes, I'd like to report a homeowner illegally blocking the only entrance to our neighborhood." I noticed what she left out. Again. She never said private road. She never mentioned my name. She never mentioned ownership. Only inconvenience. 20 minutes later, 2 patrol vehicles rolled to a stop. Sheriff Daniel Reeves climbed out first. Deputy Lisa Morgan followed behind him carrying a tablet connected to county records. Marissa reached them before they had taken 3 steps. "Sheriff, thank goodness. This needs to be removed immediately." Daniel Reeves listened without interrupting. When she finished, he simply looked at me. "Morning, Wade." "Morning, Sheriff." I handed him the same manila folder. No speeches, no accusations, just documents. He opened the first section. Certified deed. Second section. Boundary survey. Third. Maintenance invoices dating back nearly 30 years. Deputy Morgan quietly contacted County Dispatch while the sheriff continued reading. Nobody spoke. The crowd that had been complaining only minutes earlier now watched in complete silence. Marissa finally broke it. "This is ridiculous. Residents use that road every day." Sheriff Reeves looked up. Use and ownership aren't the same thing. Her expression tightened. She quickly opened her own binder. Inside were HOA newsletters, board resolutions, community maps, maintenance schedules, and printed website pages. She handed them to the sheriff. "These documents establish our community's reliance." He flipped through several pages, then handed them back. "Do you have a recorded easement?" Marissa blinked. "What?" "A recorded easement." She turned another page, then another. "Community agreements?" "No." "Planning documents?" "No." "Our board has recognized." "I'm asking for a recorded easement." Silence. She stopped searching. Behind her, someone whispered, "What's an easement?" Sheriff Reeves waited patiently. "So," he asked one final time, "can you show me any recorded document granting Silver Pine Reserve legal access across Mr. Holloway's property?" Marissa looked down at the papers in her hands. For the first time since this entire dispute began, she had absolutely nothing to say. At that exact moment, Deputy Morgan's radio crackled. Dispatch had finished checking every county record. Every person standing behind that barricade instinctively leaned forward, because whatever came across that radio next would determine who had been telling the truth all along. Deputy Lisa Morgan pressed a hand against her shoulder microphone and listened without interrupting. No one moved. The line of vehicles sat motionless behind Marissa Langford. Contractors folded their arms. Parents stood beside open car doors. Even the engines that had been idling moments earlier were beginning to shut off. Sheriff Daniel Reeves looked from the radio to the folder I had handed him. "Go ahead," he said calmly. The dispatcher's voice came through clearly enough that everyone near the gate could hear pieces of it. "Confirmed through county property records." Another pause. "Holloway Trace remains privately titled to Wade Holloway." The crowd grew even quieter. "No recorded easement benefiting Silver Pine Reserve." Deputy Morgan glanced at the sheriff. The dispatcher continued. "No public road dedication." Another pause. "No county maintenance responsibility." Then the final sentence arrived. "And no emergency access designation requiring the property owner to keep the road open." Silence. Not the uncomfortable kind. The undeniable kind. Sheriff Reeves closed the folder. He turned toward Marissa. "County records are consistent with the documents Mr. Holloway provided." She shook her head immediately. "That can't be correct. The records are very clear. Our residents have used this road for years. I don't doubt that." "So you'll remove the barricades?" "No." The single word landed harder than anyone expected. Sheriff Reeves kept his voice steady. "Using a private road does not create ownership." Marissa looked around as though searching for someone who would disagree. No one did. She hurried back to her binder and pulled out another stack of papers. "Our board approved transportation planning." The sheriff nodded politely. That's an internal board document. She produced another. We've maintained community access. That isn't a recorded property right. Another. Our newsletters informed every resident. Newsletters don't amend deeds. Every answer she offered solved the wrong problem. Finally, she lowered the papers. They depended on this road. Sheriff Reeves answered without hesitation. Dependence doesn't transfer title. Behind her, conversations quietly began spreading through the crowd. I thought the county owned it. I was told the HOA handled everything. Didn't they say this was already settled? Harold Briggs stepped forward from the second row. He wasn't angry, only disappointed. Marissa, she turned toward him. You told us the access issue had already been resolved. It was being handled. Handled isn't the same as legal. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Another resident spoke up. Are we supposed to use the other entrance? Harold answered before she could. There isn't another finished entrance. A contractor looked toward the subdivision. So how are people getting home? Nobody answered him, because everyone had finally realized the same thing at the same moment. The subdivision had been relying on a road it never legally controlled. Sheriff Reeves stepped toward the barricade one final time. Mr. Holloway. Yes, Sheriff? You've provided advance notice, supporting documentation, certified surveys, and proof of ownership. I have. From what I can determine, you're exercising your rights as the property owner. I am. He gave a small nod. There is no legal basis for requiring you to remove these barriers. No applause followed. No shouting. No celebration. The truth didn't arrive with drama. It arrived as paperwork. People slowly returned to their vehicles. Some drove away toward the longer county route. Others remained standing beside the road, looking toward Marissa instead of me. For months, she had been the person with all the answers. Now every unanswered question belonged to her. As the patrol vehicles prepared to leave, Sheriff Reeves stopped beside me. You handled this the right way. I had good advice. He smiled slightly. Most property disputes begin with arguments. And this one? It ended with records. I watched the last patrol car disappear around the bend. For the first time in months, Holloway Trace was quiet. Not because everyone agreed, because there was nothing left to argue about. The road belonged exactly where the county records said it belonged, but as I looked toward Silver Pine Reserve, I knew this wasn't the end. Residents had just discovered the road was never theirs. The next question would be much harder. If the board had been wrong about that, what else had they hidden from the people paying their dues? The answer didn't take long. 3 days after the road closure, Harold Briggs called again. You should know what's happening. I'm listening. The clubhouse is packed. Silver Pine Reserve held monthly board meetings that usually attracted a dozen homeowners. This one drew nearly everyone. Residents filled every chair, lined the walls, and stood in the hallway waiting for answers. They aren't talking about the road anymore, Harold said. They're talking about the money. That was exactly where Rachel expected the pressure to move. Once people discovered they had no legal right to use Holloway Trace, every assessment connected to road access improvements suddenly looked different, not illegal by itself, but deserving of an explanation. The following afternoon, Rachel received something she had quietly anticipated: a formal request from Silver Pine Reserve's newly hired legal counsel. They wanted copies of the certified surveys we had already served weeks earlier. Rachel smiled. They're finally reading the file. She sent exactly what had already been provided. Nothing more. Nothing less. 2 days later, another anonymous envelope appeared. Inside were board meeting minutes that had never been distributed to homeowners. One paragraph had been highlighted. The Eastern Access Road remains financially impractical. Continued reliance on Holloway Trace is the preferred long-term solution until circumstances change. The meeting date caught my attention. It had taken place before the first home in Silver Pine Reserve was ever sold. Rachel read it twice. They knew. We already knew that. No. She pointed to one sentence. They discussed costs. Another highlighted page sat beneath it. Constructing the original eastern entrance would substantially reduce development profitability. There it was. Not a misunderstanding. Not optimism. A business decision. Someone had looked at construction costs, looked at my private road, and decided one was cheaper than the other. Rachel placed both pages into the evidence binder. If this ever reaches discovery, these minutes become very important. Meanwhile, Harold continued attending board meetings. Residents no longer accepted vague answers. They asked direct questions. Who approved the access assessments? What projects had those funds actually paid for? Why had the original entrance disappeared? Had the board ever verified ownership? According to Harold, Marissa answered almost every question the same way. Our attorneys are reviewing the matter. That response worked the first few times. Then someone requested financial records. Another homeowner asked for engineering reports. A retired accountant volunteered to examine previous budgets. The confidence that had carried Marissa through every public meeting was beginning to disappear. Late Friday afternoon, Rachel's phone rang. It was Silver Pine Reserve's attorney. The conversation lasted less than 10 minutes. After hanging up, she looked at me. They're commissioning an independent audit. Voluntarily? They don't really have a choice. Within weeks, outside consultants reviewed years of planning files, financial statements, engineering documents, and board correspondence. We weren't involved. We didn't need to be. The HOA was now investigating itself. The preliminary findings spread through the neighborhood faster than any newsletter ever had. The audit confirmed the subdivision had originally been designed with a separate eastern entrance. Internal planning records repeatedly acknowledged Holloway Trace remained private property. Yet access-related planning continued year after year without securing any legal rights. Residents were furious. Not because they lost my road, because they realized they'd never been given the full story. Harold called one final time. It's over. What is? The board voted. I already knew the answer before he said it. Marissa resigned? They asked for her resignation. And? She didn't have enough support to stay. There was no cheering on my end of the phone. No celebration. Just quiet. Because removing one president didn't rebuild trust. It didn't repair damaged shoulders. It didn't erase years of assumptions. But it did something just as important. It reminded everyone that leadership carries responsibility, especially when other people's property is involved. Rachel closed the last evidence binder. I think we're finished. With the case? With proving it. She looked toward the window. The rest is simply putting everything back where it always belonged, for the first time since that white Range Rover stopped at my gate months earlier. The fight wasn't about winning anymore. It was about restoring what should never have been taken in the first place. A week after the board accepted Marissa Langford's resignation, I drove the length of Holloway Trace with a notebook instead of a folder. For months, every page I carried had documented conflict. Now they documented repairs. The shoulders damaged by heavy construction trucks were graded and rebuilt. The cracked drainage culvert near the lower crossing was replaced with a larger reinforced pipe. Fresh gravel covered the sections where years of unnecessary traffic had worn the surface thin. Settlement funds paid for every repair. Not because I demanded punishment, because responsibility follows ownership. Rachel Whitmore handled the paperwork exactly as she had handled everything else. Quietly, thoroughly, and without turning it into a spectacle. Silver Pine Reserve reached an agreement to compensate for documented damage to the road, while separately funding construction of the eastern entrance that should have existed from the beginning. It wasn't inexpensive. Harold later told me several homeowners actually supported the decision. People would rather pay once for the right solution, he said, than keep paying for someone else's mistake. I thought about that for a long time. The county approved permits for the long-delayed entrance within a few months. Construction crews finally began carving a proper connection to State Highway 287, following almost the exact alignment shown on those original subdivision plans Denise Harper had unrolled across the records office table. The road that had existed only on paper was finally becoming real. One afternoon, Harold stopped by the ranch. He stood beside the gate for a moment before speaking. I wanted to apologize. You never needed to. Maybe not. He looked toward Holloway Trace, but I believed something because it was repeated often enough. So did a lot of people. He nodded. I should have asked who owned it before assuming who controlled it. I smiled. That's a lesson worth keeping. Before he left, he extended his hand. This time, it wasn't a neighbor asking for access. It was a neighbor offering respect. As autumn settled across the valley, I turned my attention to something Clara would have appreciated far more than any legal victory. The cottonwoods. Several had been damaged by trucks pulling onto the shoulder during the busiest months. I replaced each one with young trees of the same variety she had planted years earlier. When the last tree was in the ground, I stood back and realized the ranch looked more like home than it had in a long time. The conflict had ended. The memories remained. A few days later, Rachel mailed me one final document. The file was officially closed. She had written a short note across the bottom. Truth usually moves slower than assumptions. It also lasts longer. I folded the note and tucked it inside the same manila folder I had handed Sheriff Daniel Reeves at the gate. It seemed like the right place for it. Near sunset, I carried one final sign to the entrance of Holloway Trace. The old temporary legal notice came down. In its place, I secured a permanent steel sign. Private Estate Road. Access by written permission only. Nothing threatening. Nothing emotional. Just facts. I stepped back and looked down the road stretching through my ranch. The cottonwoods swayed gently along the shoulders where Clara had first imagined them. The repaired culvert disappeared beneath clean gravel. The fence lines stood straight again. For the first time in a long while, no one was arguing over ownership. Because ownership had never really been the question. Belief was. People believed newsletters. They believed confident speeches. They believed repeated assumptions. In the end, none of those things changed a single property line. Only the recorded deed did. As I headed back toward the house, I looked once more at Holloway Trace and thought about everything the past year had taught me. People can argue over stories. Boards can vote. Developers can make promises. Neighbors can repeat what they've been told. But land remembers the truth. And so do the records filed quietly in a county office, waiting for the day someone finally decides to read them.
If this story told me anything, it's that protecting what your doesn't always begin with a conversation. Sometimes it begins with pattern, careful records, and the willingness to let the facts speak before emotion do. I never had to sound louder than anyone is, and I never had to prove my point without answers. The right word protect because the truth had been resolved long before the dispute ever started. That lesson will carry beyond property lines, whether you harm your family history or symbol your good name. Taking care of the trust today can protect you year from now. There also something encouraging in remembering that quiet persistence often lasts longer than loud confidence. People can display, assumption can breach, and story can change over time. But honestly, backed by real and evidence, has a way of finding sound road in the end. I love to hear that what you think. If you believe you're staying your route the same ways, try yes in the comment. And if you ever deal with an HOA, properties dispute, or even a situation where simple paperwork make on the difference, say your experience below. I read your comment and they often inspire future story. If you enjoy story about ordinary people standing with dignity, protecting their land, and solving conflicts through pattern and doorway, I'd be honored if you subscribe and join us for the next one. Until then, take care of yourself and thanks for spending your time with me today.